I hope that you are all well, that your week is off to a good start. We're gonna begin today with a little bit of business. I did finally get an answer on the lab participation component, and that is still a viable option, thankfully. So I want to kind of talk you through what that's gonna look like. And I would also ask you to make a note on your planners that Tuesday, March the 1st, so coming up in a couple of weeks, Andrea Anderson, who's the director at Lucy Brock, will be on our class call for the beginning of the call to give everyone, especially those who maybe haven't done in-person contact at Lucy Brock, a bit of an orientation. So you'll learn how to use the card key passcode and talk through some confidentiality policies and things like that that are specific to in-class experiences at the lab setting. So it's super important that you get all of that information, and please make a point to be here for that if you can. You'll still need to attend class. I mean, her bit is not going to be very long, and there will be some specifics to the schedule and kind of the nuances of how it will work in this course. So yes, even if you're familiar with in-person experiences at Lucy Brock, please come for that conversation still. And so what it will look like in terms of scheduling is I'm working with Andrea right now to create a share doc that will allow each of you to go in. We will start the in-person lab hours after spring break, and you'll be responsible to sign up for 4 2-hour sets of time. So you'll have 4 sessions, 2 hours apiece, and the time blocks, I believe, are 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., 10 to noon, and then 3 to 5, I think is how I've got it set up. And it'll basically run the duration of the course from spring break until like reading day. So you'll have some time to get those 4 observations, in-class observations done. But right now the schedule is being worked out between Andre and I, because I need to make sure that they don't have, teacher workday type of closures or professional development or too much else going on in their classroom to accommodate us. So I will get that available to you as soon as it is ready. But again, we have a couple of weeks until all this kind of takes off. To kind of frame your thinking around the experiences, I want to show you that on the course page, I have uploaded, and these, let me know if you can see me walking backwards. Are we back on the home page? Okay. So these are posted to the top of the course page in a folder called Lab Participation Reflection Assignments. I've also modified the syllabus just a little bit. When we first started the course, it was based around having 5 discussion posts that were going to be worth 25 points apiece. These lab assignments are replacing 4 of those discussion posts. Okay, so there will be 1 online discussion coming towards the end of the semester, and then the other 100 points that you would have gotten from online discussion, you will get from these lab participation reflection assignments. So they're worth 25 points apiece. And they kind of give you like a lens to look through in terms of what you're going to be watching for, and then reflecting about in your lab experiences. So what I will say to you is, I believe, let me open up. You don't necessarily have to go in a linear fashion with these. There are just 4 of them and you need to complete all 4, but it doesn't have to be, your first one done with your first experience and so on. So this direct guidance is one of them. I'm trying to make sure, I want to show you a specific, maybe it's number 4. Yes, so as an example, lab participation reflection number 4 is asking you to identify a challenging behavior that you observe in the classroom. you need to think about the message that the child was sending through their behavior, and then what type of consequence you saw the child experience as a result of the challenging behavior. And this is going to align with what we're talking about a little bit later on with the ABC analysis, but you may not see an instance of challenging behavior on your fourth observation. And so you need to have this kind of in the back of your mind when you're there for your first, second, and third observation, that if you notice, you know, a behavior that stands out to you as particularly challenging, that you could go home and reflect on that experience that time versus waiting until the last observation hours for you to do that reflection. And they'll all, you know, be similarly, but I just want you to be kind of aware of what you're looking for. So you're looking for a challenging behavior in one instance. You're looking for an instance of direct guidance. So describe in detail exact words that were spoken by an adult, facial expression, body language, that type of thing. Talk about the type of guidance that it was, and then whether or not that guidance that you observed was effective or not. And then you will also be looking for instances of conflict resolution. So, you know, when you see two children engaged in conflict, I want you to come back through it and describe what was the adult's response. Was it effective? How did they help the children manage the conflict? And the fourth reflection observation is going to be about noticing an adult acknowledging or valuing something that a child did in the classroom. And I think that the questions and prompts and things like that will kind of give you the specifics of what is you know, what I'm looking for. And then there's also a rubric down here. So make sure, you know, 1 to 2 sentences about this is not going to be sufficient when you've been in the classroom for 2 hours. So I want thoughtful, well-written, thorough reflections on the things that you observed, and then, you know, key in on these specific ideas as you're writing. Does anyone have any questions about this?
I came in a little bit later on this Zoom, I think like a minute in, but are we supposed to be doing this at Lucy Brock?
Yes, and I forgot to mention, so Lucy Brock has satellite classrooms that are not necessarily at the Lucy Brock on campus. Cove Creek preschool classroom, Parkway has an NC pre-K Lucy Brock classroom. So there are some other options that are not just on campus. But the infant, toddler 1 and 2, and then the preschool classrooms on campus are also options. And so what it will look like is we're going to pick this up after spring break. So it's in a couple of weeks. March 1st, Andrea, the director of Lucy Brock, is coming to do an orientation conversation for everyone. So please make sure that you're here on that date. And then there will be like a shared doc online sign up sheet where you will self-select 4 2-hour chunks of time that will go along with these reflection assignments. Does that answer your questions?
I have a question too.
Okay.
Would we be doing the infant to like toddler or like the preschool class?
Either one.
Okay.
You can select that based on your interests, your experiences, whichever you would prefer, and availability. You know, there are more preschool settings. And so I would say if you could try to get a mix of both, that would probably be ideal just for your own benefit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one question just for clarification.
Sure.
So you said that like, if we wanted to, it could be like, we can do these like simultaneously, like if I could do like, okay, I have a 4-hour gap in this day, could I do 2 of them at once, or would it have to be like once a week?
So with the acknowledgement that we're all navigating, you know, super busy schedules, I'm not going to say that's disallowed, but I would strongly encourage you to kind of spread these out across time, just because I think that there's more benefit in terms of, taking in information, digesting it, reflecting on it, rather than trying to do that with a 4-hour chunk of time, to do it with 2 hours, once a week or something like that. That would be ideal. Yep. There's a question in the chat. If you are already in Lucy Brock for another class, you can utilize that time to frame your observations and complete those for this class. I will not require you. And I think Lucy Brock manages enough extra people in the space that their feelings won't be hurt either if you don't you can double dip, if that makes sense. Any other questions on this before we move in to content? While we're kind of wrapping this up, if you will, go ahead and open up the PowerPoints that you were to look at on your own time, indirect guidance and space. I just kind of want to hit the highlights together and hear from you guys what your takeaways were. And then we'll talk about some other indirect guidance ideas for today. No other questions on the lab component. All right. So would someone be willing to hop off mute and give us just kind of a layman's term definition? What is indirect guidance? Or maybe what is an example of indirect guidance?
So it's kind of like what you do in the background that helps guide a child's behavior.
My Wi-Fi is really bad, so I don't know if y'all can like hear me well, but
We could, and then maybe we lost you.
yeah, it's so bad, sorry.
No, that's okay. Thanks for trying, Delaney. And Jessica was saying that it's the behind the scenes stuff that you do to kind of help children in the classroom, right? And so when we think about the behind the scenes, there are 3 major components: space, the arrangement of space, the materials available in the space, time. We're going to focus more on time today. And that is particularly the classroom schedule, managing transitions throughout the day, and then energy. Where is the teacher investing their energy? And then kind of how do we focus? I don't like to use the word manage, but guide, focus the energy of the child and children in the space. So those 3 components, space, time, and energy, are kind of what make up indirect guidance. And as we said, it's the things that go on behind the scenes in a more indirect way that kind of set the tone for interactions in the classroom. And the hope is that with proper indirect guidance, then we have to have less overt direct guidance of behavior, because we've set up the space and the schedule and the flow of the day in a way that lends itself towards positive behaviors and experiences, right? So one of the first ideas that was brought out in the PowerPoint that you guys already looked at on space was the idea of personal space for children. There isn't, it's not specifically spelled out in the PowerPoint, but there are some examples of like an area for one child to kind of decompress in the classroom, personal space related to cubbies, art storage, writing center, mailbox type places, a specific place where every child's cot goes every single day. What's the point of that? Why is that important for children? All of those things.
I feel like to keep them kind of in like routine.
Certainly routine and consistency is a huge element of it, particularly, and this leads into the conversation about transitions, but when children, that part of the day when children are cleaning up from the lunch table and getting, washed up and ready for nap time, that's probably the most chaotic time of the day that I've ever been in any classroom in the history of, all my time in classrooms. It just is, there's a whole lot going on. And one way to kind of manage that is to make sure that every child knows where they're going, so that you're not saying, Sue, your cot's over here today, Ella, your cot's on this side of it. Like, they just know. And also in the picture that you saw in the PowerPoint, the children have photos of their family in that space. So you can create this sense of comfort, a sense of belonging, in sort of the ways that you set that space up for the children. What about, and this will lead us into, I kind of wanted to just key in on these 4 elements of the classroom that Anita Olds is given credit for. Anita Olds developed a theory, an idea that children benefit from 4 key elements in their environments, right? They need environments that support movement, that support a sense of comfort, that support a sense of control, and competence is the 4th one. So movement, comfort, sense of control, and competence. When I talked about that personal space for one child to kind of decompress, which one of those 4 ideas do you see that as representing or supporting?
I think self-control would be the biggest one that you see in that situation.
Yeah,
Like,
and so self-control, I'm sorry.
Like the whole, this is my area, I'm in control of like what I put here and all of that stuff. So like that they have an environment where they can go and like this is like what I have. And
Yep. And if I'm out of control, I know where I can go to regain my composure. I have spaces like that as a 35-year-old. Sometimes I need a minute and I have to go take it in my space outside of, where I'm playing with my children or whatever. But we learn as adults how to manage our emotions through use of space or use of, tools, experiences, whatever. And so our job is to teach that to young children and to create availability for that in the classroom. And sometimes that can happen indirectly because children kind of learn that, and then sometimes it has to happen through direct guidance where the teacher says, oh my goodness, your body seems a little out of control right now. Let's come over to the quiet space and look at a book together so that we can, decompress, and then we'll go back to playing. And so, but having those spaces available in the environment allow children to kind of take ownership over that sense of control of themselves in their space, for sure. So other ideas on those 4 elements, sense of movement, environments that encourage movement. How do we create that for children? Think about the pictures that you saw. Think about early childhood spaces that you've been in yourselves. How do we encourage movement?
Maybe like big areas like a rug or something where they like have space to, I don't know, like wiggle around, dance around, whatever. Like there's just like big open floor.
Yeah, absolutely. Large open areas for big body movement, block play, those types of play that need movement. And that has to be counterbalanced with spaces for, seated focused work, right? You can't have a whole classroom full of wide open space because that will create the ultimate chaos, I can assure you. And so there's a balance there, but children absolutely have to move. We can also build that into our schedule of the day, right? A 30-minute group time for preschoolers is completely inappropriate. They cannot sit still that long, and you will lose their interest, and it will be frustrating for the child and the adult. So whittling that down to 10 or 15 minutes of focused seated conversation is a more appropriate expectation. Yes. And that's another example of how we promote movement, right? Because we're not expecting children to stay seated for inappropriate amounts of time and to attend to something, beyond what they're capable of doing at this age. Another thing I'll mention, and this was brought out in the PowerPoint slides in looking at, there's a few pictures of children engaged in like self-help routines, hand washing, pouring their own milk at lunch. And then there's a slide, number 38, the slide says materials near point of use. So just, an observation about mealtime is that if you have an expectation in your classroom that children are going to clean up their space, which is a totally appropriate expectation for children even as young as 2, that they clean up their materials, put them in a bin, put their dishes in a bin, go wash their hands. Children very young can do that, but they will not be successful at that if the area to clean up from the classroom tables is 50 feet across the classroom. That doesn't make any sense, and you're just opening up the possibility for lots of spills, lots of frustration, lots more chaos during that transition time of day. So you have to be really thoughtful. While yes, we want to create movement, we want to also make that movement through the classroom make sense, and not just be a challenge for children. So that's just another area where you kind of have to think about this idea of balance and supporting what they need, but not giving them so much that they can't handle it, because that just doesn't work either. So we've talked about movement, we've talked about sense of control. Let's talk about that idea of competence. How do we encourage competence with young children in the classroom? And there were lots of ideas related to this in pictures and the slideshow.
I think one thing would be like having activities that are somewhat like complicated, but not too complicated that they can't complete them and they get frustrated.
Yep. So that same idea of balance as it relates to the level of challenge in terms of materials and experiences in the classroom. Absolutely. Ella, what else? What about the materials in general? If adults are always having to go retrieve materials for children, does that suggest to the children, we think you're competent to use these materials? No, right? So materials need to be accessible, available in order to be utilized by the children on the children's terms. And then that variety in regards to what materials are available is really important. I mentioned self-help. So, that idea of cleaning up after meal times, being independent in toileting routines. I think there's a real tendency in our work to kind of rush through those times of day. And, it's a whole lot easier for one adult to change 10 diapers if you just kind of roll with it and go through the motions really quickly. But you take away the opportunity for children to learn self-help skills and to, develop that independence and competence if you don't allow them to do as much as they can in a supported way. So what that looks like is standing the child up after you've changed their diaper and having them work to pull their own pants back up, and having them get down the stairs independently, and having them go wash their hands with support and verbal guidance, rather than you just doing all of that for them. And those are, that's another idea for how you can encourage competence in the classroom. And then the final piece was about comfort. So again, lots of examples of how we support that in the classroom. Can you give me like a couple of ideas of how we support or encourage comfort?
kind of like what we mentioned earlier of including their family pictures and their cubbies, or just something from home that's going to give them that sense of comfort that home can give them, instead of it being such a strange place that they're without their family.
Yeah, I think family photos go a really long way. Comfort transitional items, most classrooms have a policy that you don't bring toys from home, just because that helps manage behaviors and conflict and things like that. But I would argue that allowing that one transitional object that can come with the child, maybe just to be used during rest time or something like that, can really do a lot, as Hannah pointed out, to kind of help them feel more connected to home when they are in, especially if it's a new early childhood setting, but in general, it's a long time to be away from your space and your people. And so anything we can do to kind of support that, buffer that, is helpful for children. What else? Comfort.
We kind of talked about when you're like obviously able to hiring people who are representative of your classroom, so that the children can feel that they have someone that they might be specifically comfortable with on staff, who like looks like them, has a similar like background as them, so that they feel, like I said, represented within that space.
Yep, Delaney, that's a great point. I think representation in terms of staffing, diversity of staff, and then also that idea of representation in the classroom in terms of displays, materials, foods that relate to a child's culture, music, all of those things can kind of help children feel more connected to their own cultures and backgrounds. Absolutely. Any other thoughts on promoting comfort?
I know one of the slides also talks about like softness of things.
Yeah.
So not just like emotional comfort, but also physical comfort for them.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. And so, some of what was talked about in this PowerPoint relates to rules and regulations, like the square footage required. And so when you open up a childcare space, a licensing consultant actually comes in and they measure square footage, and then they do a mathematical equation based on those numbers that you saw, and they tell you this room can be licensed to have up to 15 children in this space or whatever. And another regulation in terms of your star rated license, it looks specifically at the balance of soft spaces and tiled flooring and things like that in the classroom. So at a very basic bare minimum, and we saw in the PowerPoint that those space requirements are pretty minimal, right? They're like it's less space per square foot than a jail cell offers inmates. But those minimal requirements do suggest that if you're going to be a 4 or 5 star licensed center, that you have some soft spaces in the classroom. And so I would argue that we need to go kind of above and beyond that. And a lot of the pictures that you saw, the intent of many classrooms nowadays is to create a home-like feel, where you have a couch, just like the couch that you would sit on in your home, or child-sized chairs, so that children are sitting in, soft plush furniture rather than the traditional kind of classroom furnishings that, are more typical of like elementary age classrooms and are pretty typical still in preschool, but definitely finding a balance of creating those home-like spaces can contribute to comfort, and softness is a huge factor in that. One more, and I just kind of want to talk through the visual here, because I think this is a specific example from a writing center, but it gives us a lot of points to think about in terms of creating, spaces for children. So when you look at these two pictures, what is the difference? What are the strengths in the one that you consider, the better writing center space? What concerns do you have about the opposite? Somebody talk.
Organization.
Organization for sure. And
Yes,
so
yeah.
the space in the bottom is more organized in terms of presentation of materials, right? And why is that important?
I mean, not only for like the children, but like for me, I wouldn't even know where to like start if I wanted to like engage in an activity for them. I don't really know where to go almost, and it's just taking up like a lot of time, and then the kids get like distracted, and then they're not engaged with you for the activity.
Yes, and so at the end of the day, what we want our spaces to clearly communicate to a child or to a teacher is, this is what you do with me while you're here. You know, we want the materials to be set up in a way that they suggest, this is what you do with me while you're here. And not necessarily, I mean, there's a lot of options. Like, so you can see that the child might write a note to their dad in the bottom. They might copy letters from the alphabet. There are a variety of materials, pens, pencils, scissors, tape, all of those items. But you can kind of clearly look at that space and say, here are some ideas for what I might do while I'm here. Where in the top picture, it's a complete mess. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think one of the most important things that we try to teach children in terms of how they engage in an early childhood setting is that we need to have respect for our environment and respect for our peers, you know, and if we as adults are not modeling and cultivating that respect for the space through helping children learn how to take care of our space, how to put things back where they belong, how to present things in an organized and neat way, then it becomes even more difficult to teach those concepts because we're not modeling them through our classroom practices. And so, you know, the space in the top doesn't suggest respect necessarily to me from the classroom community. So if we're trying to build a community of respect, we would hope that things look a little bit more like the photo on the bottom. Any other thoughts or ideas on this idea of space as it relates to indirect guidance? All right, then we will shift gears. And today we're going to focus on those other two elements, which are time and energy. Particularly, we want to focus on the components of an effective daily schedule that allow children to be self-directed in their work and in their day. We're going to talk about that investment of energy from adults. You know, where are we focused and how does that relate to the children's behavior? And then I've already spoken with you about the direct guidance observation assignment. So referring you back to that pyramid model just for a minute, we're still at the base of it with this idea of indirect guidance. We have looked at appropriate expectations, and now we're looking at you know, elements of the environment that support. And again, the idea here is that if we have this foundation in place of indirect guidance through appropriate spaces and things like that, then we don't have to utilize as much direct guidance because the classroom environment itself serves as a guide for behavior. So when we think specifically about this time element, we are looking at the goal for managing time is maximizing the time that the children have for engaging in learning and to maximize the time that the adults can spend with children, right? We're trying to maximize time with materials and adults' time with children. One element for managing time is creating predictable schedules that still offer some flexibility. Someone pointed out that that consistency of sort of knowing what's coming up in the day, knowing where we're going at what time of the day, that's really, really important. I would say for children, but also for adults. You know, I struggle when I don't know what my life is going to look like on a day-to-day basis. It's not a very comfortable feeling. And so we need to create a sense of control through a predictable yet flexible schedule, right? So most early childhood settings have a daily routine where, you know, we do basically the same thing every day, but sometimes it rains and we don't get to go outdoors. And so we have to have a kind of an alternate plan, and that's the flexibility piece. Or sometimes we have a special visitor come in and we shift our group time to a different, you know, time of day. And we'll talk a little bit more about, you know, how you communicate that to children, but that's really the key, you know, is that we communicate it to children. Today's going to look and feel a little bit different because we're shifting something around, and here's what it might look like. You might even have a visual for that, you know, where you physically move a picture schedule around to kind of show them what's going to be different about today. And this all applies really nicely to toddlers and preschoolers, right? When I was the director at Generations and I met with infant families, I would go through our whole classroom our whole center on a classroom tour. And I would say, you know, in these classrooms, toddler, 2s and 3s, preschool age, you know, we have kind of a flow of the day and the children sort of fit within that. But when I was in the infant classroom talking about the infant schedule of the day, we just do what they tell us to do when they tell us to do it. You know, you don't impose your schedule on infants, because infants are hungry when they're hungry. They need to sleep when they need to sleep. They need to, you know, play when they're available for play, but all of their rhythms determine their schedule. So this doesn't apply to the infant classroom. But again, as I said, children gradually begin to conform to a group schedule. And so in an infant classroom of 11 to 12 months old, you know, you might see children even a little bit younger than that, 9 months old, you might see them starting to take that one nap a day, kind of in the middle of the day, and they're naturally conforming to more of a older child daily schedule, you know, but again, appropriate for kind of toddlerhood on. And then within this schedule that is kind of for the whole group, we also have to be really careful to meet the individual needs of the child, you know. So sometimes we have children who their schedule at home is different. I have often seen, not often, but you know, on more than one occasion with more than one child, I've seen a child come into school, eat breakfast, and then go lay down in a center and fall asleep because they arrived to school still sleepy. And we have to support that. You know, it's really not fair to the child or to the rest of the classroom to try to keep them awake when they physically need the rest. And the same thing goes for nap time when everyone else is sleeping. You know, sometimes 4-year-olds are kind of outgrowing the need for as much sleep as their peers. And so we also have to support that, right? We can't just expect them to lay still and quiet for a 2-hour nap if they're not sleeping. Again, really unfair to the child and the whole group. So while we have these schedules as kind of a parameter and a framework, they're not the end all be all. And there is some gray area in terms of meeting individual children where they are. There is an example in your textbook. So if you haven't seen that, refer back to it for this idea of time block planning. But generally speaking, what we're looking at in terms of early childhood scheduling are time blocks, right? Where you have 2-hour chunks of time or 1 hour, 30-minute chunks of time that are sort of intended to be used for free choice in the classroom, or, you know, 20 minutes for group time and transition to outdoors. But you don't necessarily see, you know, like when I write my own planner for the day, sometimes I have it blocked off in very specific, like at 9:30, I have a meeting, you know, at this time, and then at 2 o'clock, this is something a little bit different where it's just kind of like chunks of time. They can be associated with a time on the clock as well. But the time block planning is the idea of creating those sort of blocks for different experiences. So transitions, I've already mentioned in our conversation that transitions are one of the more challenging times in an early childhood classroom. I specifically mentioned that transition from from lunch to nap, right? Think about other transitions in the day. So someone tell me another transition.
From being inside, then to being outside on the playground, or from being outside on the playground to back inside in the classroom?
Yes, so anytime the whole group of children, or even a small group, sometimes we do it in small groups, but anytime a group of children are moving from all inside to outside or outside to inside, that's a transition in the day. What's another one?
Maybe getting them all in the morning, like, or in the afternoon, like how you're getting them set up for the day, or how you're getting them, preparing them to leave.
Drop off and pick up, absolutely. And those tend to be, in most classroom settings, a little bit more naturally managed because they kind of have a flow to them. They're like staggered, you know, not all children arrive at 8 a.m. necessarily. In some classrooms that might be the case, but those are certainly transitions. They need intentionality and thought behind them, but they do tend to manage themselves just a little bit more most of the time. Can anyone think of other transitions? What about just inside the classroom, kind of like that mealtime transition? What are some other transitions that happen in the classroom?
Whenever I worked in a preschool, we had the transition of them playing to go into the quiet time, like circle time, to listen to stories or learn about something specific. So they had to go from being able to be loud and play with toys to having to sit still and contain themselves for a few minutes.
And something that's normally built into that transition is this period of cleanup time, you know, so that can be a big one. And in most settings, I would say that that probably only happens once in the morning, maybe once again in the afternoon. And the reason why, right, is because you're just setting yourself up. The second bullet point on here, this is probably the most stressful time for children and adults. You're setting yourself up for a really challenging day if you ask children to do that more than once or twice, you know, in the morning and in the afternoon, that cleanup and come to circle type of thing. Not to say that you can't like gather a small group of children to go read a story or, you know, interrupt their play in another way. But when you're doing this whole group transition and cleaning up the classroom and coming together, it just creates several moments of chaos. And that's like, we want to try to minimize those, right? And if you think about these examples that we've talked about, mealtime, arrival at school, mealtime, going outside, circle time, you know, another meal for lunch, nap time, cleaning up from that, getting ready for play. Transitions happen all day long, you see. And so even in the most carefully crafted early childhood setting, you can't get around having a ton of transitions every day. So what's important for us is to manage these well. And so I would like to hear from you if you have observed teachers using strategies to manage these transitions. What do those look like? What do they feel like? Give me an example.
Sometimes when I worked in a daycare, using different types of music can help children. Like if you're trying to get them to start playing, like you can play more like hyped up music, I guess, but then like transition to nap time, they use choir, like lullabies.
Yes, so music and then the vibe of the music, as she pointed out, can be really important. Oftentimes, you know, cleanup songs are kind of like these big, loud, like dance while you work type of songs, because we want children to be energetic and doing what we're asking them to do. But when we come in from, you know, outside playtime and we're getting ready to use the bathroom and sit down for nap, lunch, that might be an opportune time to have some kind of chill music playing, or maybe, you know, a visual on the smart board that's like waves or something, because you're trying to set the tone for like, hey, this is the time of day where we're starting to relax. Yes. Other than music, what are some ideas?
I've seen where they're transitioning to like line up, where teachers will like have them line up by like what colors they're wearing or like what's their favorite animal.
Yep. So, and that's just an effort to manage the large group and break it down into small groups. Yes. And so any way that we can do that is always helpful. We talked about it in another context in terms of relationship building. But I always recommend for classrooms who have enough staff to support it. If you're trying to take, you know, 18 children outside, it just makes so much more sense for one teacher to gather 9 children and you're still in ratio, you're still meeting all the guidelines. Take your 9 children outside and play for 10 minutes. And then you have time to engage with those children in kind of a more individual way, which is relationship building. You've cut the stress of that transition in half, right? Because you're only responsible for half the children and the other teacher is only responsible for the other half of the children at that point. And they get 10 minutes inside with 9 children versus 18 children, and they can, do whatever they do. But I think that small group approach, and even as simple as building it into, lining up to go outside if you're doing all 18, or if you're leaving circle time, instead of saying, all right, it's time to go play in centers, and letting every child get up at the same time to run amok, until they find a place to play, managing that with some of the strategies that were just shared, like all the children wearing blue can go find a center to play in, or, if your name starts with whatever. And those are also learning opportunities, because we're trying to have children recognize colors and letters and things like that. And so it's kind of a playful way to build in some learning and to manage the large group. Other ideas besides the strategies that we've just mentioned?
When I was observing at Lucy Brock, they would use like a timer on an iPad, and it was like really colorful. And so like the kids could all see it where they set it, and it would count down for their time to clean up and then transition.
Yes, timers can be particularly useful for the large group. They can sometimes be a strategy that work really well for one child who might have challenging behaviors. I've seen timers be hugely successful with children with diagnoses of autism. So they need a lot more kind of forethought about transitions in the day and what's coming next. And so, yeah, timers can be super beneficial really across the board in terms of helping children predict and know what's coming next, and then kind of responding in kind. Shifting now to thinking a little bit more about the schedule and the routine. We have these routines built in, and we kind of expect, and over time it will naturally, children will kind of naturally fall into the rhythm of the classroom, but it happens so much more quickly and is really more successful for the adult and the child if we explicitly teach the routines and the schedule to children. Again, when children are able to anticipate what's coming next, they feel more secure in the classroom, they have that sense of control. And this can be, I just mentioned children with atypical development. This can be particularly important for them. And so here are some strategies when we're thinking about teaching the routine to children, establishing and following the routine consistently, and then kind of teaching children like what's expected of them during each piece of the routine, So visual calendars can be a great way to accomplish this. A lot of classrooms have, usually kind of near their circle time area, a visual picture schedule. I think it's best when you can include pictures of the children in your classroom doing the work that time of day requires of them. So, when they're doing free play, you would have children at free play. When you're outside, photos of children outside. And it's normally, if you put this on like a Velcro strip or sometimes a poster board with Velcro pieces that are movable, that allows you to make those shifts when you have to say, oh, we have a special guest coming today, so we're going to move circle time to the afternoon because this morning so-and-so is coming in our classroom, to talk to us or whatever. But the kind of tangibleness of these schedules is really helpful for children, and they can go and refer to it on their own, which again, contributes to that sense of competence, sense of control, those ideas that we've already talked about. Sometimes children, especially children who have atypical development, might need their own individual schedule. I've also seen this work really well with children with behavioral challenges who might not be successful if they are just left to their own devices to choose where to go play and engage during those large chunks of free play. So sometimes a strategy that you might use is to sit down in the morning with a child, kind of as a transition into the classroom, and ask them, where are the 3 places that you think you want to spend your morning? And then you might use a timer or some sort of, you know, mechanism for helping them manage that, but giving them, you know, 3 choices instead of 9 choices or whatever is available in the classroom sometimes really helps them be more persistent and be more engaged. And, you know, you might see fewer challenging behaviors as a result. These type of picture schedules are also utilized in other settings for children. So like hospitals, and people who are interested in child life, this type of approach can also be used for children, again, to give them a sense of kind of control over their medical experiences and what's going on with them in that regard. I'm not going to show the videos, but just be aware that there are some examples embedded in this PowerPoint that give you a demonstration of someone making a change to the routine. As I mentioned earlier, rainy day schedules. So if we can't go outside, what do we do differently on a day like today? And then another kind of spin on the meeting schedule idea is, this is specifically a schedule for morning meeting circle time part of the day. So we have this kind of first then idea. First, we're going to do our morning song, you know, see who's at school and who's not. And then we're going into small group work or whatever. I would say that, you know, maybe there's a lot of things on this first board, maybe kind of doing 3 things and then putting 3 more up might help children like minimize that feeling of, that feels a little bit overwhelming to me. That's just me. But anyways, the point is, you know, even if we have it built into the larger part of the day, we can also build this kind of consistency, predictability, et cetera, into other portions of our day as well. And then this is an idea of how we might partner with families to create a getting ready for school type of visual schedule, right? So, you know, a family might approach you and let you know that they're having a really hard time with their child at home, getting them up, getting them dressed, getting them out the door by X amount of time. This is kind of the same idea, just applied to the home setting. And again, just helps children understand what's happening every day and understand kind of what are the expectations for them during those times of day. All right. I think we probably talked about these transition cues. So transition cue is kind of the idea, I think Delaney mentioned, of the timer. It's like a visual, you know, the music that was mentioned, those are all examples of transition cues. That is the idea of helping children, you know that something's coming up, we're about to go from one thing to the next. There are another idea mentioned here is to turn the lights off to get children's attention. I will say, I think personally, my experience with this is that that should be paired with that time of day where we're kind of starting to relax. I mean, normally in my home with my people, I don't like turn the lights out or flash the lights to get their attention. So that's kind of, to me, I would reserve that one for that transition to nap time type of part of the day, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. It's just, you know, it is a way to get children's attention for sure. So I have these, and I thought they were included in this PowerPoint, but they're not. I have 4 kind of putting it into practice ideas. And so I want to talk about these ideas in small groups, and then just have you sort of share back with the group what your group came up with. So I'm gonna just create the breakouts, and then I will, I think I'll just send you a message with these 4 ideas, or maybe I'll hop in and chat them with you really quickly. Let me stop my screen share. I'm also going to stop recording because, all right, as we're coming back together, if we could hear from group 1, someone kind of share your scenario, and then what were your thoughts on what you would teach and how. Group 1 had the child who refused to come to circle or stay at the circle.
So we discussed how, where I'll repeat, there was a child who, when circle was called, he instead dropped to the floor and was refusing to come to circle. And so we all kind of agreed that you need to not totally dismiss his feelings, like tell him like, it's okay that you're feeling that way, but we are having circle time right now. And not spend too much of your effort and time on just him when you have a whole other class, but don't totally just ignore him also. So we thought of different ways you could handle it. One being that, like, okay, well, I'm gonna go start circle time. You can stay here, but please join us when you're ready. One girl said that if you made him feel more included, like giving him a special job or saying, let's go to circle, and if you come to circle, you get to share with the class this. And just finding a way to still include him, but not force him into something he's not wanting to do, and not having too strict of a punishment on him, but letting him know, okay, well, if you don't come, you're not going to be able to do this with your classmates.
Yep, I think those are all really good ideas. And I appreciate that you all pointed out that your investment of energy in that instance is really important, because yes, we want to validate that, you know, the reality is sometimes I'm not feeling like doing the things that I need to do, and I might not do them, you know, and that's okay sometimes. And so kind of validating that for the child, but also recognizing that if you divert your attention too much from the large group to that one child, you're going to lose the large group, you know. So that's when you kind of call in your reinforcements and either have another teacher in the classroom, maybe take that child to the quiet area, help them kind of manage themselves. And so we can see in this example how time, space, energy allocation, all of those things kind of come into play here. Yes. So the second group was the child who wants to go outside when it's time to play in centers.
Yeah, so they're all the other kids are playing in centers, and this one little girl is trying to like leave outside to the door and keep saying no, play out, and just isn't budging and just really wants to go outside. So we talked about how we could remind her and pull out the schedule and say, no, like, remember we always go outside after nap time, and then we have centers before, and kind of just remind her of that. And also maybe like divert her attention towards like, oh, remember it's your favorite toy, blah, 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 your favorite thing to do, blocks, or like point out a friend she has there, like, don't you want to play with so-and-so? They're playing with this, and like kind of divert her attention, because like young kids kind of have a shorter attention span. So like that's one way. And then yeah, I think that's basically all we said. And we would teach like also patience, and like kind of patience and how we have to wait a little longer to go out, and also safety, about how like she can't go out alone, and how if she does go out, she needs a teacher, and we can't go out until later with the other kids. So all those different ways. Great ideas. So drawing on the daily routine, redirection. Sometimes it could be as simple as like, oh, you know what? I really want to go outside too. Why don't you come over to art and draw me a picture of what we're going to do when we all get to go outside? And then you just like, it's her idea, you've woven it in, but you're playing in art, you know? And yeah, so all of those things that, and then teachable moments, right? Building in those teachable moments where like, this is why we can't do this right now. I feel you, I want to do it too, but we got to stay safe. We got to stay together, that type of thing. Yes. Group 3 with the train.
Sorry, I did not realize I was unmuted before, but so we had a little girl who it's snack time and she's playing with the trains and then she gets upset and starts throwing pieces across the room and screaming. So we said first get on her level, like assuming she's down on the ground, like get down and talk to her on her level, like acknowledge what she's feeling. Like, I know it's so fun to play with trains, but like we already had time to play with trains and now it's time to move to snack. And then we also said like kind of like saying like if you don't have snack now, like you might be hungry later, like kind of why it's important to go there now. And then if she like keeps acting that way, oh, we also said like be personable and like oh, I know, like acknowledge what she's feeling and like try to like not casual but like not make a big deal of it kind of thing. And then we said if she kept acting that way, like let her go to a calming area where she can like kind of regain, I don't know, just be calm and then go to snack from there.
Sure. So the main thing is we don't want her to keep playing with trains, right? Because the natural consequence for throwing train pieces across our classroom is like, oops, we don't get to do that anymore. And we also want to acknowledge maybe you're not feeling ready for snack, maybe you're not hungry. Here's why I think it's important for you to eat right now, but you can also go to the safe space and chill out or whatever you need to do. But I think making sure that she doesn't get reinforced by being allowed to stay and play in that center is a really important piece to point out. And then all those things that you guys mentioned in terms of, you know, validating, teachable moments, again, kind of why we're doing this now, all that stuff. Very nice. And then the fourth was a child transitioning away from his mom at the beginning of the day.
So this one really resonated with me just because I was that child, and when I say I was terrible, I was terrible. My mom, like, she would try and like draw me off, and it would take probably like 20 minutes for her to like stay and like kind of get me acclimated in the classroom for her to leave. And so all of us as like a group, we were talking about how, you know, maybe, you know, you didn't exactly specify if this student was you know, American, or if he might be American Hispanic. And so maybe if you're American Hispanic, you know, we could try and find somebody like in the building, like a caretaker that could kind of get him acclimated as well. But not only just have like the parent who's dropping him off to stay with that child for a good maybe like 5 to 10 minutes tops, and get them kind of acclimated in like the activity, get them engaged with the caretaker especially. And then once they're super engaged in that activity, kind of slowly, progressively, you know, leave the classroom.
And so sometimes transitions for one child need a little bit more time. You know, we need to build in that piece. And so it becomes really important to have open communication between the caregivers and the parent, especially if this is, you know, if it's a one-time thing and it happens once, the child's just having an off day or whatever. But if this is a pattern of behavior, the adults need to put their heads together and think through what's going to work best for this child. How do we make them feel safe? How do we make them feel secure? And you might even have to make special accommodations for that child to bring an item from home, you know, whatever works. But the point is open communication, making the child feel secure, because without that foundation in place, they can't engage in their day in a purposeful way, and they really can't learn until they feel safe and secure in that classroom after mom has left them, you know. So super important. And yes, we can draw on a lot of the ideas that we talked about to kind of build that in. But I think the most important thing to point out on this one is that individualized nature of what might work for some children, because some children respond to like a really playful approach to this, right? And then some children need a more warm, nurturing, they don't want to play with you. They want someone to snuggle them and hold them for 10 minutes to get them comfortable before they play. And so we have to kind of learn what works for which child and then implement that here. There's a few slides that I didn't really go over towards the end of this PowerPoint, so look at those on your own time, and also be aware that there's some video opportunities in there for you to kind of get a visual on this stuff. And then, yes, if you will type your names into the chat before you hop off, that is all that I have for you today. Your asynchronous content should be pretty straightforward. And it does include a quiz. So make sure you cover the content, reading, and then take quiz 6 by Thursday. Okay,
I do have a question for you.
sure.
It's not related